Everyone, thank you. We are obviously at the outer limit of our capacity now. There are about 50 standing room only seats in back. Thank you all for coming on Halloween Eve. And thank you for joining us for this very special event. My name is Michael Clark. I'm the director of the Portland Center for Public Humanities these days. And this project tonight is being sponsored by an extremely generous grant from the Mellon Foundation. It's entitled, the grant supports a program entitled Religion, Secularism, and Political Belonging. It's an international and cross-disciplinary project which unites schools from Holland, Hong Kong, Tel Aviv, University of Arizona, and here at PSU. The project raises questions about the secularization thesis, which was so predominant in religious studies, some for the past half century, and asks how faith, secular culture, and religious forms in politics interact today. Many people have participated to make this day possible, and I have to announce them. I want to announce them, so I have to. Oh, what the heck, you know? Never mind. No, really, these people have supported us in many ways. The Mellon Foundation, of course, the Consortium of Humanities Centers International and Institutes, the Departments of Sociology and Anthropology at Lewis and Clark, the Culture and Media Program at Marylhurst University, the Critical Theory and Creative Research Program at Pacific Northwest College of Art, the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, our collaborators in the Religion Secularism Study Group, which they come from Reed, from PCC, from Lewis and Clark, and beyond, the Oregon Psychoanalytic Center, one of our collaborating groups, and our dear friends at the University of Arizona. I also have to thank John Smythe, who is the coordinator of the RALSEC program this year and was instrumental in coming up with this wonderful scheme to get these two great scholars on the stage together. Lee Medavoy, the chair of the Department of English at the University of Arizona, and he wrote the grant that made this possible. He was the original writer of the grant, and he's been incredibly generous. Continuing to support PSU in this project. Also, I'd like to thank and welcome Professor Reginald McGinnis of the University of Arizona, who you'll meet in a moment. He's an expert on the work of Jean-Pierre Dupuy. And finally, and most importantly, Ms. Van Pham, who is going to raise her hand and wave. Yes? I'm telling you, this would not have happened without her and her coordinating capacities. She's the assistant director of this Humanities Center at PSU, and this event would not have come to any fruition whatsoever. She is indispensable and brilliant and wonderful. So, yeah, enough of that. Quick note on the format tonight. In the next few moments, I'll give a very brief in-depth introduction of Professor Zizek and his work. Most of you are familiar with his work, so I won't burden you with my intake on it. After that point, Professor McGinnis will introduce Professor Dupuy. Professor Dupuy will speak first, and he has some visual elements, some slides he'll be showing. At that point, after he speaks, he'll speak for about 30 to 45 minutes. That will be followed by Professor Žižek's presentation, 30 to 45 minutes, we don't know. Bad joke. Sorry, Professor. He was joking about this. He said, well, all right. Finally, we'll follow up with a conversation, we hope, between our two guests and maybe 2 or 3 questions from the RELSEC group in the audience. These are the people that have been working in the project for the past 2 years. So it's not an open question set up. It's just going to be sort of a few questions that people that are sort of been working with them over the time that's been going on. That should take us up to about 7, maybe 7:15. So now on with the show. Slavoj Žižek burst onto the academic scene with the 1989 English language publication of his seminal work, The Sublime Object of Ideology, where he argues that traditional critique, argues many things, but he argues that the traditional critiques of ideology are not only outmoded, but misguided. His almost superhuman scholarly production, he's the author of over 50 books, countless essay collections, and a number of films, has earned him characterizations, I can't help it, I'm sorry, as a bulldozer of a thinker, the Elvis of philosophy, and an academic rock star. As Jeremy Biles of the Art Institute of Chicago puts it, with engine roaring, Žižek's work plows through history and philosophy, overturning conventional understandings and turning up potentially new ground for thought. It's almost impossible, and it would be presumptuous to try to summarize the parameters of Professor Žižek's radical, and one might say parallax, intervention in contemporary culture. The range of his critical work is stunning. Everything from toilet seat design to Coca-Cola cans, to Coca-Cola, to the global economic collapse, to the works of Alfred Hitchcock, for whom he remains one of the most brilliant analysts, to the function of religious faith, to the very nature of desire itself in its struggle with the threat and promise of the real. All these things are his targets and his subject matter. Finally, his work is, although very dense and sometimes difficult, is also incredibly readable. He has remained committed to speaking to a large audience. There's an old joke about Jacques Lacan, a friend of yours, introducing a discussion of Lacan and Foucault, and he said, Foucault always said, "I never understood a word Lacan said." They were friends, by the way. And then Mireille says, "So if you feel ever troubled in that way, you're in good company." Professor Zizek has committed himself to a study of not only the forbidding spires of high theory, Hegel, Marx, Lacan, Kant, but also of the ways in which that theory unfolds in mass cultural works like The Sound of Music, the detective film, film noir, and in everyday absurdities, most notably caught in many of the jokes he interjects in his critical analyses. During the past decade, Professor Žižek has directed his astonishing critical energies to rethinking the legacy of religious and spiritual thought, an endeavor that includes analyses of Christianity, New Age mysticism, Islam, Zen Buddhism, political ideology, ecology, atheism, the list could go on. We're thrilled to have him here today.
It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's first speaker, Jean-Pierre Dupuy. As you may have read on the flyer announcing this event, Dupuy is Professor of French and Political Science at Stanford University, Professor Emeritus of Social and Political Economy at the École Polytechnique
Philosophy.
And a member of the French Academy of Technology. He is the author of over 20 books in French on topics ranging from the pharmaceutical industry to cognitive science and nuclear catastrophe. Looking at the titles of his books, from the pharmaceutical invasion and the betrayal of opulence in the 1970s to the mechanization of the mind in the mid-1990s, it is not immediately obvious where Dupuy might fit relative to the religion, secularism, and political belonging initiative that is sponsoring tonight's event. I promised to be brief, so I'll just make a few remarks that may help to explain the relevance of Dupuy's work to the Mellon Foundation's RELSEC project, and hopefully make it easier for some of you to follow. While the scope and nature of his research corresponds to the term so widely used today, it should be mentioned that Dupuy's work was interdisciplinary long before this word began gaining currency on American university campuses. Interdisciplinarity for Dupuy was less a method than part of a personal evolution, or maybe one should say a personal revolution. A student of mathematics and science at the École Polytechnique, Dupuy was quickly disillusioned by the bureaucratic tasks awaiting him upon graduation. Forsaking the technocratic career that seemed to be his destiny, he sought refuge in the teaching of mathematical economics, and as he writes, in a series of disappointments and refusals, of renunciations and successive reconversions, followed in descending order through the recognized hierarchy of disciplines, leading him to a systematic critique of everything in which he had once believed, including science and technology. In 1982, Dupuy published a book titled Order and Disorder, comparing theories of self-organization in biology, cybernetics, sociology, and anthropology, as well as other fields. The purpose of this book, which focused on the work of Henri Atlan, Francisco Varela, Cornelius Castoriadis, René Girard, and Heinz von Forster, among others, was to build a bridge between the two cultures, scientific and literary, in search of a new intellectual paradigm. One of the concepts considered in this book, along with, for instance, order from noise and self-referential systems, is that of self-transcendence or self-exteriorization, whereby a system produces from within an exteriority which governs or regulates it, as exemplified, for instance, by Rousseau's social contract, which puts laws over men, even though it is the men who make the laws. It may be helpful to underscore Dupuy's reliance on this particular figure throughout his career, the figure of self-transcendence, which he also calls bootstrapping, and notably in his recent book, The Mark of the Sacred, with respect to a theory of time, which is to say a theory of how a people may be pulled forward by an image of the future that it is projected in front of itself. In Order and Disorder, the discussion of modern scientific and social theories is coupled with a reflection on modernity's loss of transcendence and incomprehension of traditional religious structures. This aspect of Dupuy's thinking is foregrounded spectacularly in The Mark of the Sacred, where the debt of modern scientific rationality to religion is the underlying thread of an analysis of modern-day politics, science, and technology. But this critique of rationality should not be viewed as a simple defense of religion, at least not in any usual sense, but rather as the work of someone who has been described by a famous historian of science as a rationalist extremist. A similar line of inquiry is pursued in a book published earlier this month, Economy and the Future, emphasizing the irrationality of markets, and where economy is said notably to occupy the space emptied out by the desacralization of the world. One of the merits of Dupuy's recent work in particular, and I'll end with this, is that in identifying the ills of modern society, it also proposes bona fide solutions. Jean-Pierre.
Thank you very much. So Slavoj and myself, we are in love with the same woman, but that doesn't create any rivalry, jealousy, envy, because this woman is a fictional character in a fiction called Vertigo, and in that fiction, she doesn't exist. She is a fictitious character and a fictional character. So no rivalry between us. The music. Okay. Sorry. We'll see. Sorry. The music. No, there's no music.
Sabotage. I'm KGB Stalinist. Find the traitor, liquidate him, and then.
Okay, doesn't matter. This is the title of my talk. Yeah, you see it here. Yeah. But first, I should say that it's an immense pleasure for me to be invited to join in conversation with Slavoj. And I want to thank John Smythe and Michael Clark for this. And I want to thank Reg for introducing me. By the way, you made a Freudian slip. I've been a professor of social and political philosophy and not economy. Economics and the economy are for me the enemy, the target. So I must admit that I wasn't familiar with your work, Slavoj, until friends told me, you know, Žižek, that's how you are called in France, discusses your reading of Vertigo. Žižek refers to your metaphysics of projected time, etc., etc. So I hastened to read the books they brought to my attention and realized to my astonishment that I had never had a more perspicacious or a more profound reader. I then sat down to read more of your books, and I'm still a long way from having read them all. Who could boast of such a thing apart from you yourself, I suppose? And as far as our encounter here is concerned, at least as a piece of intellectual theater, we are in a theater after all, there might be a problem because I find myself in agreement with so many points you make in your work. But of course, the feeling may not be mutual, you'll tell me. But of course, our points of reference, our styles of thinking, our commitments are very different. So we'll see what happens. In the talk I'm going to deliver now, there will be a good number of references to Zizek's works, but I won't make them explicit, so it's your task, you who I understand know Slavoj's work very well, to try to guess what they are. And maybe it's your task too, if you're willing to play that game. Okay, so the title of my talk is Lacan's 12th Camel and the Collapse of Self-Transcendence. And Reg already spoke a lot about me, about the concept of self-transcendence. I'm going to talk about the 12th Camel now. So it's a joke, and I was delighted to discover that Slavoj and we share a taste for jokes. Not any kind of jokes, of course, jokes with epistemological or metaphysical implications. And Jacques Lacan himself was very fond of mathematical puzzles, as we know. One day, the following parable occurred to him. Here it is. An old Arab, sensing that his end was near, drew up a last will and testament, distributing his wealth among his 3 sons. And he told them the following. You, the eldest, you shall have half. You, the next oldest, you shall have a quarter. As for you, the youngest, you shall have a 1/6. Now it happened that the estate consisted of 11 camels. Problem. The brothers were extremely angry. None of them wished to carve up a few camels. And they were on the verge of murdering one another when at last they agreed to ask the local judge, the Cadi, what they should do. After a moment's reflection, the judge said to them, take this camel under, this is not a camel, by the way, it's a dromedary, it has only one hatch, but okay, forgive me for this. Take this camel under my tent, I make a gift of it to you, add it to your patrimony. If Allah wills it, you will return it to me sooner than you think. And indeed, the eldest son was happy to take the half of 12, that is 6 camels. Likewise, the middle son to take 1/4, that is 3 camels, and the youngest son 2 camels. 6 plus 3 plus 2 equals 11. So the 12th camel was able to be returned to its owner. The counter gift immediately cancelling the gift made by the judge. The 12th camel, or the symbolic camel, stands for something that is at once useless, after all it didn't serve anything, and indispensable, for by means of it a social contract comes into existence. Later on, Jacques Derrida's disciples were to call the 12th camel a supplement, playing on the double meaning of the word supplement, at least in French, something that on the one hand is added to an already constituted totality, whole, and on the other makes up for something missing, a lack. Later on, the German sociologist Niklas Luhmann made use of Lacan's parable in order to illustrate his theory of law. And if you Google search das 12. Camel online, you will find hundreds of sites devoted to this parable. It has to be in German, of course. I believe that every self-instituted social order is created through a paradox of this kind, the economic world no less than any other. Think of it. The symbolic camel passes between the judge and the 3 brothers, but the 2 phases of the exchange are not on the same level. This is why they do not in fact cancel each other out. The camel offered by the judge bears the mark of its owner's authority and exteriority. When it comes back to the judge, it is simply the sign of a lack in the distribution of parts. If you make the sum of these 3 fractions here, you don't get 1. you get 11/12. That's how it works. The politician seeking public office who says to his fellow citizens, that was Mitterrand in 1981, give me power so that I may give it back to you, is saying something similar. The power that returns to the people is crowned with the sign of the general will. Every human group achieves unity, that's a contention, by projecting itself outside itself by means of the equivalent of the 12th camel. In philosophy, as Reg said already, this structure has a name, self-transcendence. Its enigma resounds with the mystery of incarnation. A God who makes himself man is at once transcendent and immanent. Man among men, he must constantly resort to ruse and trickery in order to diffuse their violence. He cannot help but fall victim to this violence in the end. And it is his expulsion that reestablishes peace, and that makes him God, a God that, to begin with, perhaps, he was not. There would be no economic life without self-transcendence. Economic science or economics is not yet aware of this. Let me take the example of money. My great friend, French economist André Orléans, in an exceptional book called The Empire of Value in English, has shown that money remains the intruder, the odd one out, the unwelcome third party in orthodox economic doctrine. Money has no place in its central dogma, the theory of general economic equilibrium. It is simply that which comes after the fact to facilitate the circulation of commodities once an equilibrium has been calculated and the terms of the exchange determined. Now, just as the 12th camel is a camel like any other when it figures in the calculation of shares, while nonetheless being an external transcendent camel by virtue of the fact that it is what makes sharing possible, and therefore the community as well. So too, money is an incarnation or embodiment of the whole community, and one that, like other commodities, circulates within it. The reason money can be both transcendent and immanent is that, like the camel of the fable, it has the character of a lack. When all is said and done, it is only the acknowledgement of a debt. Actually, American economists use the acronym IOU, the three letters, IOU. Of course, which means I owe you. Who owes something to whom? It's a treasury, and as we know, the treasury is empty. But it works anyway, like that. Keynes, a genius, understood all this. He regarded the desire to possess money for its own sake as the supreme evil. Think of it. The three brothers were certainly tempted to keep the 12th camel for themselves, since, after all, the judge gave it to them. But very quickly, however, they saw the trap that had been set for them. For they were faced with a terrible question. Who shall get the 12th camel? Once again, the prospect of conflict, probably of violence as well. In other terms, the symbolic camel could fulfill his messianic role only on the express condition that no one wished to have it for himself. I could restate the main conclusion of my research in the philosophy of the human sciences by casting them in terms of this one figure, the 12th camel. They are embodied in turn by the following things: not only power and money, which I've just now briefly mentioned, but also wealth, victims, the future, catastrophe, apocalypse, and last but not least, God. In view of my recent work bearing on the metaphysical foundations of economics and of Slavoj's wish that we talk about God and evil, have chosen to concentrate on the economic catastrophe that we are currently experiencing. The general title of this symposium was advertised as, and that was your choice, Is God dead, unconscious, or just evil? So I translate that in my own terms as I replace God with the future, and that becomes, is the future closed or even foreclosed, obsolete, or just indeterminate? replacing God by the future may be justified in the following manner. I defend the thesis not that economy has become our new sacrament, something we hold to be sacred, but that, like the sacred, economy has an ambivalent relationship to violence. It contains violence in the two senses of the word to contain. To contain is to have within oneself, but also to keep in check, to stem. Economy, like the sacred before it, erects a barrier against violence by violent means. Now, the domination of the world by economy, I think you would say, of course, capital, has radically changed our relationship to the future by making the future the equivalent of a 12th camel. That's what I want to show now. That is, by causing the future to emerge through a mechanism of self-transcendence. It is this relationship to the future that today is in the process of completely falling apart. If the future has become the new sacred, then its collapse will not be without grave consequences. Second part. Oh, sorry, this is publicity for my recent book, so I pass very quickly. So, logic of self-transcendence, and I want to introduce a concept that may sound barbaric, like that, the endogenous fixed point. I hope it will become clear in a few minutes. First of all, I would like to introduce a concept that is less picturesque than the 12th camel, but more rigorous, the endogenous fixed point. When the cybernetician Ross Ashby conceived of an electronic turtle in the 1950s, the first thing he did was to build two turtles and to program each one of them to imitate the movements of the other. You had two turtles and they were following each other. What do you think happened? Well, to help you find what happened, recall the story of the two absent-minded professors. I'm absent-minded. I think Slavoj is also, no? Yeah, completely. So that might happen to us this afternoon, tonight, maybe. So we have received invitation to the same event, and we decide to go together. Neither of us knows how to get there, but each one believes that the other knows. The path that emerges from the two of us following each other exhibits a certain stability for a time, but it cannot last, of course. Sooner or later, one of us will ask, "Are you sure we're going the right way?" And you will say, "But I'm following you." "No, I'm following you." The properties of such paths have been studied in detail in recent decades, using subtle and yet everything considered fairly elementary mathematics. But it is the phenomenological aspect that interests me here. And first I need the sound now, the real sound, the good sound. So I'm going to show you a clip. It's an Argentinian clip. It's an ad for business magazine. It goes very quickly, so be extremely attentive. There are two words spoken in Spanish. Cruza, sí. Cruza in the given context means, are you crossing the street? And the answer is, sí, yes, I am. Okay, so you're ready, it's going very fast, and the sound is going to work, huh? We need the sound, okay. Sí.
Cruza, sí.
You have two blind people. If you have two blind people, neither one can see that the other is blind as well, of course. So the one is really asking, you see that I'm blind, well, cruza, you see that I'm blind, would you help me cross the street? But the other is answering, yes, see, to a different question. I see that you are blind. Do you want me to help you cross the street? You see how it works? The moral of it went very fast, so I don't know if you saw that very clearly. The moral of the story is that it's better not to be informed than to believe you are informed when you are not. And the current financial crisis is driven in part by mechanisms of this kind. So, double mediation, that creates a trajectory. So let's return to the two absent-minded professors. Their mutual imitation generates a trajectory, a path, which seems to be guided from within by an exterior point, the destination. That's what we think from within. But from without, the theoretician who studies this, me putting myself at the exterior of the mechanism, I see very well that this path that we took together, I'm not going to say chose together, because is a creation of the double imitation. It doesn't, the destination never pre-existed the path itself. So we have this structure here. Everything occurs from within as if, so the terminology, scientific terminology for this is attractor and dynamic. Replace this by and, or destination and history, or process. From within, everything occurs as if the attractor were attracting the dynamic, were guiding the dynamic, but actually from without, it is the dynamic that creates its own attractor. This is a beautiful paradox. So, this kind of attractor, I call them endogenous fixed points, because that's a fixed point, but it's produced from within, endogenous. It's produced from within. Okay, next chapter, the future as an endogenous fixed point. The relationship to the future instituted by economy is a quite singular one. The market, in particular, is pulled forward, by an idea of what has not yet happened, that it projects in front of itself, like a mountain climber, if you like, who ascends a smooth, ice-covered slope by throwing his peak ahead of him and pulling himself up to a new height. Well, this image cannot work. It lacks an essential element in which the paradox of self-transcendence of the future resides. Times to come cannot be said to resemble the face of a mountain, since by definition they have no present existence. And yet the market acts as though it were able to give a kind of reality to what does not yet exist. So for the ice-covered face of a mountain, we must therefore substitute the image, and Reg already referred to it, of Baron Munchausen, who was able to pull himself out of a swamp by his own hair. That's what this picture represents here, but in another version, by his bootstraps. Hence the phrase bootstrapping, which has become common usage, especially in American English. For instance, anyone who has booted up a computer. Okay, if I ask you, you boot up your computer, those boots, they come from where? Huh? I mean, where are the boots in your computer? Well, they come from this image. So they come from Germany, of course. Baron Munchausen. It's a novel of the 18th century by his name was Rapp, I think. Yeah. And it's very interesting to see how this image went to America when the German Jewish scientists fled from Germany and came to this country. Okay, I want now to talk about a configuration of the relationship to the future that seems to reconcile economic reason and political reason, which is to say, makes economy the solution to the political problem par excellence, which is the problem of violence, of course. I call it coordination by means of the future. Let me give you a specific example of what I mean by that. But it's just an example. I wouldn't like to I wouldn't like you to think that this figure is summarized by the example I'm going to take now. I'm referring to the French economic planning system as it existed in the 3 decades of rapid growth following World War II. Nothing to do with the Gosplan. It's and I want to quote here from the economist Pierre Massé, was one of the founders of this. Okay, this Nietzschean quote. I skip it. No, lack of time. It's already, yeah, shortage of time. So Massé described the task of the plan, as we say in French. Its task is to achieve by concerted deliberation and study, and all the forces of French society were the elements of French society were present at the elaboration of the French plan, and it was really a collective deliberation, democratic deliberation. Its task is to achieve an image of the future that is sufficiently optimistic to be desirable, and sufficiently credible to give rise to actions that will bring about its own realization. Suppose it were not credible. Of course, you see, you could try to find as a fixed point the paradise, but absolutely not credible. So the loop wouldn't look back on itself, of course. It has to be both desirable and credible. So coordination by means of the future entails that agents all take the same future as being fixed. I have to say what I mean by fixed here. No matter what an agent does, he assumes that its action will have no effect on the future, even though the action is causally responsible in part for bringing it about. So this is the diagram which represents this. The agents take the future, that is an attractor, as fixed, while they very well know that they cause the future to happen. How can you take as fixed something that you very well know you are causing to happen? Well, because one has to introduce another relationship other than causality, and it's called counterfactual causality. Just 2 words about this. It would require hours to flesh this out satisfactorily. So, this is a famous quote from a French philosopher and mathematician, Pascal. In the 17th century, Cleopatra's nose, had it been shorter, the whole face of the world would have been changed. This is a counterfactual proposition. It's called counterfactual because the antecedent, had Cleopatra's nose been shorter, is contrary to facts, counterfactual. Cleopatra's nose was as long as it was, that's all. Counterfactual propositions do not behave like indicative conditional proposition. Think of the contrast between the 2 following examples. If Shakespeare has not written Hamlet, someone else has. Because Hamlet is a play, there must be an author. So if it's not Shakespeare, it's someone else. Now, let's reason in counterfactual terms. Had Shakespeare not composed, not written Hamlet, someone else would have written it. Very unlikely. If you believe that only the bard had the sufficient genius to write that. So you see, when you go from indicative to counterfactual, it's very, very different. So I return to the previous diagram. The future is taken to be fixed in the sense counterfactually independent of our actions, but it is causally dependent on our actions. Okay, this is how the coordination by means of future function. The future in that case is a fixed point, a common point of reference for everyone, but this fixed point is an endogenous fixed point since it is causally produced by the actions of individual agents. But it is immediately apparent that in order for this to work, the loop connecting past and future must be a closed loop, like this. Well, first let me say, I make the distinction between two kinds of metaphysics of the future. The one I call occurring time, where the past is fixed, and you have a branching out structure, possible futures. The past is fixed, the future is open, there exist possibles, the branches that are not taken by history, that will never occur. What I call, and in that case, I'm going to cite an Argentinian writer, time is a garden of forking paths. El tiempo es un jardín de senderos que se bifurcan, because you are half Argentinian. Projected time, the future is fixed, and this is a reference point, the benchmark, and we are going to see that that implies that the past is open. And in Slavoj's work, there is a very interesting passage in one of the many books that you wrote about the openness of the future, but of the past, sorry. But we don't have, that's not the same meaning. You don't give the same meaning to, and it would be interesting, we can do that later or tomorrow, to compare those two ways of construing the openness of the past. And the past and the future must come together in a closed loop. The future is the fixed point of the loop, okay? And every possible occurs either in the present or in the future. That which does not occur in that metaphysics of temporality is impossible. Sorry. Now, there is a closure condition. The reaction to a future that is held to be fixed must be able to causally produce this same future. We coordinate around a given future, an image of the future that we take as a fixed point. We react to that image. There is no guarantee that our reactions together will causally produce the future in question. But if that is not the case, then it doesn't work. Projected time, the experience of projected time, doesn't exist in that case. This is very important, this point. I'm going to, but I'm not going to flesh that out. Sorry. Everything occurs in that structure of time and of the future in particular as if the agents were predetermined, in a sense. The future is written, except we don't know what's in the future. We don't have access to what is written on the great scroll of the future. But at the same time, we consider ourselves as free agents. So the combination of a predetermination and of free will was precisely what Max Weber, in his thesis about the connection between the Calvinist doctrine of predestination and the spirit of capitalism, consisted in. But I'm not going to, for those of you who know this is exactly the same structure. We have a paradox here, of course. The paradox is, can one choose one's destiny? Free will and predetermination. Can one choose that which in the past determines one's fate? Well, choosing one's destiny, it's not my invention, of course. If you read Heidegger, Bergson, his most famous student, Sartre, and many others, and Max Weber's thesis, this is at the center of this paradox is at the center of their thesis. But I'm going to take, to illustrate this, to take a personal example. I have, my children are Franco-Brazilians. That is, their mother is Brazilian. And my daughter, that's an aside, but that's a malaise of the economy in Western Europe, and France in particular. So she couldn't find a job in France, so she decided to, she's perfectly cultural, bilingual, etc., to move to Brazil, where she found a great job, great husband, and a great son. That is my grandson. But she returns to France from time to time, and she was on the flight, she was on board the Air France 447 from Rio de Janeiro to Paris, that links Rio to Paris every day, on May 31st, 2009. Had she decided to travel the day after, she would be in the ocean. You may remember that there was a big crash. just one day before. That's what the military Americans call the near miss. It was a near miss. I was at Stanford at the time, so when I heard about the crash, I knew that my daughter, Beatrice, was already in Paris. But nevertheless, I had a retrospective panic, fear, and I called her, and I couldn't hide my retrospective fright. But she was very calm, and she told me the following. Oh, sorry, it's in French. Actually, we don't speak French, we speak Portuguese together. But so let me translate. If I had postponed my journey by one day, the crash would not have occurred on that day. And my daughter is not a philosopher, but, professional philosopher. But in a sense, she is. So, what does that mean? One could say in ordinary terms, she believes that she was born under a good star, etc. So whenever she flies between Paris and between Rio and Paris, or vice versa, there will be no crash. But there is a better way to put it. She was not endowing herself with the causal power to act on the sequence of events that lead or not to a crash. No, she was endowing herself with a much weaker power, which is, okay, that's her name, a counterfactual power over the past. Huh? If I had decided to travel the day after, in that other possible world, the crash that in our world occurred on June 1st would not have occurred on June 1st. Huh? Counterfactual power over the past. This notion must be my iPhone somewhere. This notion was put forward by, I think, one of the greatest living American philosophers. His name is Alvin Plantinga. He teaches at the University of Notre Dame. We use the French pronunciation after all. University of Notre Dame, Indiana. And as his name indicates, he's a Dutch Calvinist, believes in predestination and free will, precisely. Counterfactual power of the past. I'm almost finished. Yeah. So, fourth and last chapter. Yeah, well, I'm not going to insist on this, but I had, in order to do, for those of you who are philosophers, had to return to the first serious metaphysical argument. Diodorus Chronos was a contemporary of Aristotle, and he incredibly axiomatized, avant la lettre, the free will in a deterministic world. So, to make it simple, the past is fixed. There's nothing I can do now such that if I were to do it, the past would have been different. The act of cowardice that I did 50 years ago would not have occurred. The impossible does not logically follow from the possible. Okay, that's very abstract. But there is a possible which neither is presently true nor will be so. That is, the future is open, branching out. All of this looks self-evident, except that Diodorus Chronos demonstrated that these three actions are incompatible. And a French philosopher, Jules Villemin, wrote a beautiful book called Contingency or Necessity, rereading the history of Western philosophy as many attempts at transcending this obstacle here. Okay, the economic crisis, my last chapter, or as a crisis of the future. Economy is no longer capable of producing a future through self-transcendence. That's how I see the origin of the current crisis. And I see two main reasons for this impotence. First, capitalism cannot survive unless it believes it is immortal. This is why growth is held to be sacred. And yet, from now on, capitalism stands in the same relation to its own mortality as we do, we human beings. It knows that it will die, but not when, neither the day nor the hour. And if I had more time, precisely, I would try to show that this prevents the emergence of the self-transcendent mechanism. Secondly, economy has mystified political life, the very thing without which no self-transcendent future can be produced. Economy has conquered the whole of society, destroying the exteriority on which it depends. So it's a suicide in a sense. What becomes of the concept of an endogenous fixed point under these circumstances? Can it still be the future if we don't want it? If we don't want our destiny? If we can choose our destiny, doesn't that mean that we can also refuse it? It was in posing these questions that I was led to devise the method I call enlightened doomsay, in French, catastrophisme éclairé, enlightened catastrophism. Suppose we stand the formula of French economic planning I mentioned before on its head. So now the question is, I will say why I call this the Jonah and the Jonas paradox, referring to two prophets, the German Hans Jonas, that's the 20th century, and Jonah, the prophet, the biblical prophet of the 8th century before Common Era. You know, the guy who refused to predict the fall of Nineveh. And as you may know, that's just an aside in passing, but I mean, Nineveh today is called Mosul. And the so-called, how do you call it in English? I mean, Islamic State destroyed Jonah's mausoleum in Mosul, that is Nineveh. Bravo. So, it's a matter of achieving by concerted deliberation and study an image of the future that is sufficiently pessimistic to be repulsive and sufficiently credible to give rise to action that will prevent it from being realized. Suppose we invert the formula. It cannot work for one reason. It's not the future if you stop it. How can we organize ourselves around the future that we do not want? Because if we succeed, that won't be the future. It's not the future if you stop it, it's a quote. It's a quote from Spielberg's movie, Minority Report, which is based on a beautiful short story by Philip K. Dick, which itself is based on Voltaire's great metaphysical novel meant to make fun of the Leibnizian system called Zadig. Okay, that's the affiliation. Voltaire, Philip K. Dick, Spielberg. Maybe going downwards. Downhill. So, you may remember there is this incredible dialogue. Let's not kid ourselves, we are arresting individuals who've broken no law, but they will. The Commission, this is in the movie, I'm not making it up. The Commission on Crime itself is absolute metaphysics. The precogs, those who predict the future, see the future, and they are never wrong. But it's not the future if you stop it. Isn't that a fundamental paradox? That's in the movie, and then comes Tom Cruise. Yes, it is. It's okay. This is a paradox we have to deal with. So this is how I saw the, and here this is becoming very complex, and I have minus 5 minutes to flesh it out. In order for the problem is that we have to organize ourselves around the future that we don't want to happen. So it's not the future. It cannot be a fixed point. So at the same time, we want two opposite things. In order for the expected catastrophe to exert a deterrent effect on the present, it is necessary that the catastrophe be part of the future, written down, as it were, on the great scroll of history. But if this is the case, we are doomed. It is necessary then that both the occurrence of the catastrophe and its non-occurrence be part of the future at the same time. What does this "and" mean if it's not a contradiction? Well, the answer is to be found, that's my work at least, in the philosophy of quantum information. You may have heard of the Schrödinger's cat. So long as the box containing the unfortunate cat remains unopened, we must say that the cat is both dead and alive. Or more precisely, that the living state and the dead state coexist in a relation of superposition. Opening the box puts an end, not to what is too often called uncertainty, but to what in German is called Unbestimmtheit, which would be translated not as uncertainty, but as indeterminacy. Unbestimmtheit, indeterminacy. Let me illustrate this with a more mundane example. Once upon a time, I had an American girlfriend, and she lived in Stanford, and I lived in Paris, so it was not very convenient, of course. And I don't know why she insisted in the importance of exchanging Valentine cards on Valentine's Day. It's supposed to be a French invention, Saint Valentin, but I've never practiced that. Anyway, for her it was a problem. So one year, she sent me, these typical American cards with 2 sheets, and you have something written on the first side and then on the third side. That's a punchline. Eh? So the card I received on Valentine's Day in Paris had the following structure. This is, or this is not, a Valentine card, depending on whether, when you receive it, you will already have sent me or not a Valentine card. So this is exactly the notion of superposition. Until she knew that I had not sent, actually, a Valentine card, the state of this card was indeterminate. Not uncertain, but indeterminate. So it's exactly the same structure. So the endogenous point, the fixed point in that case, is the superposition of the catastrophe and the non-catastrophe. And that's what the 12th camel in this case is. One last word. Let me quote the most important French poet, Victor Hugo. A man is an earthworm enamored with a star. That's in Ruy-Blas. If is an earthworm enamored with other stars, economy should in principle be concerned with the earthworm, its finitude, its limited needs. But with the cult of growth, economy has become the star, which is our guide only because it recedes as we advance. In truth, growth has all the qualities of a panic. Today, the star has burned out. Etymology helps us describe the resulting state. Well, in French, we call that a désastre, but it's in English, it's disaster. Disaster means asteroid, the disappearance of the star. That's what disaster means. The star is no longer there. Actually, there is another word which has the same etymology. It's desire. And that's really interesting. Desire, say it in Latin, desiderate, sider, that's a star. Sider. So desire is the absence of the star. That's why you desire something. You've lost your star. But here it's a disaster. Those who call for slower growth, or even no growth, partial though I am to their arguments, seem to me not to sufficiently appreciate the dilemma facing us. One does not wean a drug addict from his drug overnight. One does not renounce one's faith without suffering. Deprived of the sacred, condemned to live in a world without growth, who or what will be able to satisfy the desire for the star, for the infinite that we harbor within us? Thank you very much.
It's incredible. Yes.
Oh, yeah,
It's incredible. I can also check myself.
Oh, Madeleine again, sorry, to finish. So let's turn off the lights. Could you turn off the light?
Well, we simply go on. I go on.
The chiefs are there.
Okay, perfect. I cannot emphasize enough how honored I am to be here, first in the city of Portland. You can imagine what I did this morning. I went to the sacred place here, which is Powell's, the bookstore, of course. I mean, you know, Hegel says something wonderful in his lectures on the philosophy of history, that a wonderful idealist remark that the Peloponnesian War, the real one, was fought so that Thucydides was able to write a book on it. This is the spiritual game. In the same sense, I agree with you, the city of San Francisco was constructed so that Hitchcock was able to shoot Vertigo in it.
Very good, yes.
And Portland is here to have the bookstore power. If you lose that one, you lose your endogenous fixed point and so on. And no play with superposition here, you know. Okay, so I'm proud to be here. Point two, thanks to all of you, especially John and Michael, for organizing this, and I'm especially honored to be here with my friend Jean-Pierre Dupuy. Not only this, it's more than a friend. He is really one of those whom I consider my secret master. You know, like, I read his books and then I behave towards you, I didn't tell you this, in a totally opportunistic way, in the sense of I follow a certain line of thought, then I discover that you took a different line. So once I really acted learning that as a pure Stalinist, I quickly ran home and erased all those files with the... I tried to change my own past, which didn't fit with your... So I'm just glad to be here. I have so many points to, but let's leave this to
Further.
our later debate to go on. Let me just deliver my paper, which unfortunately will not have this logical consistency of yours, but it will make some points which I think that at a deeper level do echo some of your points. Let me begin with a very weird film. Probably not a lot of you saw it because it's half forgotten today. It's one of those religious Christian films called The Rapture from '91, written and directed by Michael Tolkien, a film in which Mimi Rogers plays Sharon, a young LA woman who works during the day as a phone operator, endlessly repeating the same questions in a small cubicle, while in the evening she engages in orgies and so on. Bored and dissatisfied at leading such an empty life, Sharon becomes member of a sect which preaches that the end of time and rapture are imminent. So, turning into a passionate believer, she begins to practice a new pious lifestyle. She gets married with Randy, one of her previous swinging partners, and they have had a daughter, Mary. 6 years later, when Randy is shot to death by a madman, this totally meaningless catastrophe makes her, Sharon, and her daughter even more convinced that rapture is approaching. Sharon believes God told her that she should go with Mary to a nearby desert camping place and wait there until the two of them, she and her daughter, will be taken up to heaven, to be reunited with Randy. Mary, the daughter, gets impatient and proposes her mother that they simply kill themselves so that they reach heaven quickly. After a couple of weeks, Sharon decides, totally desperate, tired of waiting, decides to do this. She shoots her daughter, but then stops, doesn't shoot herself, realizing that suiciders are not allowed into heaven. But the point is not that this is a simple opportunistic fear. No, she immediately goes to the police, confesses her act, and is arrested and taken to a local jail. Now, up to this point, it can be a simple, even atheist, critical story about how religious fanaticism ends up in disaster. We can imagine the ending, how Sharon is alone, totally broken, aware of the horror she has committed, and so on and so on. But now the reason comes why I like the movie. At this point, totally weird things begin to happen. While she is desperate alone in the prison cell, rapture happens. The real one. Literally, in all naivety, including bad special effects. First, deep in the night, Mary, her daughter, appears to her with two angels, and then a loud trumpet blast is heard all around, and prison bars fall down. She escapes the prison, runs into the desert, and sees the four horsemen running around, four horsemen of the apocalypse. I like this first reversal, because it is as if we have a brutal, ironic God who does the opposite of what we, half believers, half atheists, would have expected. Our expectation is something like, oh, maybe Bible is not to be taken literally. Of course, all these are ridiculous, superstitious stories, but it's just that, we should look at it metaphorically, symbolically. It simply means there is some deeper spiritual truth, whatever. No, here God's message to man is something like, you read the Bible, what did you think, that I was kidding or what? No, screw your, search for deeper meaning. I wrote what I planned and here you got it now. Now comes an even weirder reversal. That's not the end. Sharon is then raptured, transported to a purgatory-like landscape. We see paradise in far distance, like some enlightened castle. Then, in a vision, Mary, her deceased daughter, approaches her and pleads with her to accept God. She said, in a very Pascalian way, it doesn't matter do you really believe or not. Just say, Jesus, I love you, or whatever, and look, we are here, me and Randy, your husband, my father, we are just gladly waiting for you. Then something incredible happens, and that's the end of the film already. Sharon simply refuses. Although, again, there is no doubt now, there is God and so on. She said that I am not ready to declare my love for God, who acted with such cruelty towards my family for no reason at all. When Mary asks her mother, do you know, mother, what this means? Do you know how long you will be confined to stay here if you refuse to say to God, I love you? Sharon replies, yes, I know, forever. The end of the film. I mean, it's a totally crazy, incredible film. Why do I like it? So Sharon realizes that she wasted her life appeasing a God who is only toying with her feelings. And that's the paradox of the film. It would be very easy to accept all this if we were to discover that God doesn't exist, that Sharon was just caught into her religious imagination and delirious imagination. But the paradox is she persists in renouncing a God who is real. But a narcissist giving us life for the sole purpose of demanding unconditional love in return, no matter how much damage his demands have inflicted on human lives. Now, this is not a joke. Such indifferent and narcissistic God is part of a certain, at least Christian tradition. For Nicolas Malebranche, pupil of Descartes, in the same way that the saintly person uses the suffering of others to bring about his own narcissistic satisfaction, Malebranche had no illusions here, in helping those in distress, God also ultimately loves only himself. He merely uses us, our human suffering, to promulgate his own glory. So Malebranche draws this incredible conclusion. It is not true that if Christ had not come to earth to deliver humanity, that if Christ had not come to earth to redeem us, everyone would have been lost. Quite on the contrary, nobody would have to be lost. All of us had to fall so that to give God the opportunity to come and deliver some of us. It's a very weird logic, and you find similar absolute miracles in Malebranche. For example, it's close to morbidity. For example, he said that at no point was God more happy than when he observed his son dying in pain on the cross. Okay, now back to the movie. Sharon's resistance to God, her refusal to declare her love for him, is, I would claim, an authentic ethical act. It would be totally wrong to say that she rejects the false God, and that in an authentically Christian version of the film, the true Christ should appear at the end, proclaim her a true believer precisely because she rejected to declare that she loves the false God, and so on. The true temptation to be resisted is to declare our love for a God who doesn't deserve it, even if he really is a God. Now, I confront the obvious, naive, materialist question. All this cannot but appear as a pseudo-topic, a rather stupid mental experiment. Isn't this obvious? Why engage in these stupid games? Isn't it that simply for a consequent materialist, we should simply renounce God? There is no God, and not play these stupid games. God is, but he is maybe evil, not good, whatever. But I think that there is something much subtler here at work. We should, in consequent materialism, undermine, as it were, the fiction of God from within. Because if we don't do that, then this fiction can prolong its hold over us in the form of disavowal, which is almost, I'm tempted to say, the way a great majority of us continue to believe. I'm always making this experiment with all my relatives, friends. I ask them, okay, cut the crap. Do you believe in God or not? And it's absolutely incredible, sorry for this brief improvisation, what answers do I have? Like half a year ago we had in London a conference on the actuality of theologico-political. And there were some big theologies and so on. And literary theorists, others. And I did something which obviously broke all the rules of polite conversation. I asked them, listen, I'm sorry, but this is a conference on theology. Do you believe in God or not? It was incredible. They reacted as if I asked them, like, in what position did you have sex last night or what? Absolutely, one of them, I will name him, he's my good friend Eric Sentner. He said, well, I prefer not to engage in that direction because I speak here as a literary theorist. Don't mess me into that and so on. There were theologists then, leftist theologists who said, listen, that's not the point. The point is how to mobilize progressive politics today and so on and so on. So I think that far from being an exception, this is, our belief today. It's even something like, I know there is no God, but he is nonetheless a noble and uplifting illusion. Some of my Jewish friends who are Zionists, even one of them openly told me another version of this paradox when we debated West Bank. He said, I know God doesn't exist, but nonetheless, he gave us West Bank, Palestine. Why? Now I go into much more serious waters. You can imagine what I will try to prove in a bloody very serious way. I'm not kidding. I consider myself an atheist, but only through Christianity can you really be an atheist. You have to go through Christian experience. If not, then you don't believe it. But the fiction persists, determines you. How? Let me do now something for which I really hate myself, but it's necessary here. Let me repeat an old joke which I used, I would say at least a conservative estimate, some 15 to 20 times in my work. So, it's an old joke, you are not obliged to laugh, but its structure is wonderful. You know, that classical joke about an idiot who believes he is a grain of seed and it's finally cured in the lunatic asylum, is left out and comes running back, and his psychiatrist asks him, but why are you so frightened? Why do you come back? The guy says, well, I met a chicken and I was afraid the chicken will eat me, no? And the psychiatrist says, but wait a minute, we cured you. You know that you are not a grain of corn or whatever. And he says, yes, I know it now, but does the chicken know it also? This is how we believe today. Another story which I used only 5 times in my book, so I can tell it to you. The one you mentioned, quantum physics, we all admire. He was a true genius, much more than Heisenberg, who got it wrong with that uncertainty principle, Niels Bohr. You know, there is a wonderful anecdote about him. He had a small wooden house somewhere in suburbs around Copenhagen, and at the entrance of that house there was a horseshoe. In Europe, this is a superstitious item, allegedly preventing evil spirits to enter the house. And a scientist friend visiting him told me, wait a minute, you are a scientist, you shouldn't be superstitious. Why do you have that horseshoe there? You cannot beat Niels Bohr. You know what was his answer? I know I don't believe in it, I'm a scientist, but I have it there because I was told that it works even if you don't believe in it. That's how this is ideology today. In what sense? Now you will say, I'm telling you a joke. Oh, let's go further. First, I'm saying this is what Jacques Lacan means by the idea. In late Lacan, he liked to repeat that the formula of true atheism is not God is dead, but God is unconscious. It means precisely that. For example, in psychoanalysis, today patients are cynical. You know that Freudian standard joke, this is not my mother. When you ask a patient, who is that woman in your dream, and he answers, I don't know who that woman is, I'm just sure that it's not my mother. Well, today we don't have patients like that. A patient today would probably immediately told you almost the opposite, like, I don't know who that woman is in my dream, but I trust you. Probably it has something to do with my mother or whatever. So the point is not to put it in this metaphoric terms, the true task of psychoanalysis is not to convince you about your unconscious desires, whatever, but to convince the chicken, which is your unconscious. It's much more difficult. You know who knew this? Although I'm very critical towards a lot of his work, Marx. What Marx meant by commodity fetishism is something much more mysterious than it may appear. Look how Marx begins his famous subchapter to the supplement, subdivision 4 of the chapter 1 of Capital on commodity fetishism. I quote Marx, a commodity appears at first sight an extremely obvious, trivial thing, but its analysis brings out that it is a very strange thing. abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. End of quote. Are we aware what a strange thing Marx is saying here? It's the exact opposite of the naive, materialist, enlightened critique of religion, which says, oh, you, I'm simplifying it, you idiot, you live in your obscure religious fantasies. No, but in reality, no, Marx is saying the opposite. You think a commodity is just an ordinary object there. You think money is just an instrument for us exchanging commodities. But what has to be brought out is precisely the implicit metaphysical topics that you practice even if you do not believe in it. In other words, even if you are an atheist, your unconscious remain divine. Which is why when Marx provides his definition of ideology, sie wissen das nicht, aber sie tun es. They don't know it, but they are doing it. It doesn't mean the vulgarity. Oh, you think one thing, but you are doing another thing. It means you do not know the illusions that you follow, but you are doing them. Like, to put it in simple terms, in your self-consciousness, you are a vulgar materialist, like utilitarian. You think money is just an object, blah, blah, blah. But what you are not aware is that in your social practice, you act as if you believe in magical properties in money. And commodities are here chicken. Marx evokes this idea when he says, if commodities could speak, they would say this and so on and so on. It's this weird fiction of commodities speaking to another. Now, so again, the point is of fetishism. Marx is not that we live in some superstitions and some naive, enlightened procedure should enable us to get rid of it. No, Marx's point is precisely that, especially in modern era, where we appear to be enlightened utilitarians, we are not aware of the theological niceties, etc., which continue to structure our life. And my friend Alenka Zupancic, one of the members of my Slovene Lacanian gang, applied also this chicken joke, or Marx's joke on commodities, to God. He said, instead of lunatic asylum, imagine a revolutionary materialist society where those who still believe in God are treated like madmen and they're ideologically brainwashed. So imagine one of them being finally cured, now you know there is no God and so on, and he is released, but he comes running back and says he is scared of being punished by God. Now the teacher there tells him, teacher of materialism, but you know now that God doesn't exist. He said, I know that God is dead, but does God know it? I'm afraid that God didn't learn this news, and so on. Now, why am I mentioning this? Now I turn to my favorite theologist, the old Catholic British Gilbert Keith Chesterton, who got this point. He said that all other religions, of course, you find in them atheists, people who don't believe in God. But he says only in Christianity you find a God who, at least for a brief moment, doesn't believe in himself. Here is this wonderful quote. When the world shook and the sun was wiped out of heaven, it was not at the crucifixion, but at the cry from the cross, the cry which confessed that God was forsaken of God. And now let the revolutionists choose a creed from all the creeds, carefully weighing all the gods of inevitable recurrence and so on. They will not find another God who has himself been in revolt. Let the atheists themselves choose a God. They will find only one divinity who ever uttered their isolation, only one religion in which God seemed for an instant to become an atheist. And I don't have time to develop it, but this is why I claim today's era is perhaps less atheist than ever. We don't believe, but we always structurally need another naive gaze, what, following Jacques Lacan, maybe I could have called the subject supposed to believe, who believes for us. Like, I'm old enough, unfortunately, I never participated in them, but to remember late 60s, 70s, sexual revolution, swinging, orgies. I had some friends who were already in middle ages, which means family, they had children, and I noticed how all of them, they were participating in orgies, blah, blah, but everything turned on how their children or parents, there always was someone who shouldn't know about it. If they were to learn that that one learns about it, it would have meant the end of it all. That's why I think, I mean, this is a total distraction, but how our era, which may appear, even in sexuality, the most permissive one and so on, as many intelligent observers, like the French Lacanian Gérard Weitzman, they noticed how, you know, the usual dogma is who needs Freud today? We are open, we can admit all our desires. Yes, but did you notice how the price of this permissiveness today is that one basic insight of Freud is totally obliterated: children's sexuality. Children are again elevated into innocent beings, and child molesting is returned as the worst you can imagine, the ultimate crime. There are some other crimes, I don't have time to go into them. I don't smoke, but my wife does, and she converted me not into smoking, into believing it. How I think it's part of the same ideology, this obsession with how dangerous smoking is. It would be nice just to follow in Hollywood who still smokes today. Basically, serial killers and Arab terrorists before they explode bombs and so on. But okay, so my point is, we need another innocent one. And I'm sad to say that even a film which I up to a point liked, Roberto Benigni, La Vita è Bella, you know, relies on this structure. We know what Auschwitz is, but in order to save the innocent child, you have to construct for him the fiction that this is just a big game, we are free to leave at any point we want, and so on. You know, let me make a counterfactual mental experiment. Don't you think that it would have been a much more desperate film if, you remember the last scene when they are taking Benigni to be shot at the very end, and he waves at his son, if at that point somehow his son were to let him know that he also knew it all the time, that they are in a camp, but that for the same reason as his father, he just pretended to believe him to make it easier for his father. Yeah. Because he knew that if his father were to know that the son... So this is my category here, which is absolutely crucial. The category of a social belief which can function as a belief, even if nobody believes, even if no empirical individual believes. Now, let me go on. The reason I am fully attached, shamelessly, to so-called, I hate the term, Judeo-Christian tradition, is that I claim that this insight into the horror of God and so on, monstrosity of God, is the lesson of Judeo-Christian tradition. How? It all began with the book of, how to pronounce it, the guy who got screwed up, Job. The book of Job. I think this is the first and maybe one of the greatest books of critique of ideology. Why? Remember what happens in it. After Job is hit by all the calamities, what happens then? 3 or 4 theological friends come, and each of them gives him, Job, the same message. Not so much is he innocent or not, but your suffering has a deeper meaning. The first one tells him basically, even if you think you are innocent, look more deep into yourself. The other one tells him, maybe God is testing you, just persist. The message is, your suffering has a deeper meaning. And now comes the first shock. You know, when Jehovah, God comes, surprisingly, he says, I simplified what these theological friends were telling is bullshit, you, Job, were right. Your suffering has no meaning. I think that this is the first big lesson. This resistance to search for a deeper meaning when we encounter catastrophes. But then things go on. Again, I will refer to Chesterton. After getting this answer for God that he is right, Job nonetheless asks, okay, but tell me, but why then did all this happen to me? Then comes God's answer, which I claim is usually totally misread. Where were, basically a kind of arrogant speech. Where were you when I created all those strange creatures, monsters? Usually these lines are read as assertion of God's arrogance, in the sense of, who are you, tiny, creepy mortal, to know it? We are simply on a different level. But Chesterton, in his short essay on the book of Job, gives, and for me it's terribly convincing, gives a totally different reading. He says that God's answer is rather something like, you think you are in trouble, but look at the world that I created. Everything is a mess in it. You are not an exception. And now you will say, I'm dreaming here. My Jewish friends provided me in my last book, blah, blah, you find the proper quotes. Do you know that in Talmud, there are two passages which I call, you will immediately see why, Annie Hall passages. You know the dream scene at the beginning of Annie Hall, the movie, where Woody Allen character is debating with a guy about Marshall McLuhan theories, and then Marshall McLuhan comes and says, you know, says of course to Woody Allen, you are totally right, that guy is an idiot, he done. In one of, and I'm not kidding, this is not a joke, this is the sacred text, Talmud. Two rabbis debate some theological point. The one who is losing the debate says to the other, but listen, who are we to decide? Let's call Jehovah. It happens. Jehovah, an old guy, comes, but before he even starts to talk, the other rabbi starts to shout at God, listen, old man, you did your job. You did it pretty bad, but okay, you did it. Now, beat it. We theologists have to debate some serious matter. And you know what Jehovah says? He answers, oh my God, you got me, and runs away. It's absolutely breathtaking. Now, I will probably, yes, it looks bad, so let me jump. Something that I wanted to say, how this big, I will condense this part. What I wanted to develop also is the different problems and readings of the book of Job. The way I understand it is that the secret of Protestantism is that what predestination means. It is that you have a brutal, ignorant God who simply, without any criteria, makes his, in predestination, makes decisions. So I even wanted to play it. I didn't want to. You know, the last Johnny Cash hit, The Man Comes Around. This is for me the best of this Protestant God. What I don't like Johnny Cash as a singer, but what I like in this song is the horror of how the Last Judgment is portrayed, presented. It's not, oh my God, we the righteous will stand up. It's literally like we are all lined, a man, like some police comes and you are in, you are out, you are in, you are out. I was shocked to establish that clear parallel between Last Judgment here and the way in his, if this is a man, Primo Levi describes what he calls selectia. You know, every 2 months in concentration camp, all the inmates had to run naked in front of some SS doctor, and he just quickly took a look and quickly, yes, no, means gas chamber or you continue to survive. Again, you will say, why this crazy vision of God? What has this to do? I think to arrive at what Jesus Christ means, you have to go through this. I think that because what happens for me, that's my reading, which is basically Hegel's reading. What happens on the cross? It's not that God sends us a messenger and okay, it failed, sorry. God says to Christ, come back to me, come back to your dad. I will try maybe in 1,000 of years. No, as Hegel put it, what dies on the cross is the God of beyond itself. What dies on the cross is precisely this idea of God as a secret master up there who, no matter how bad things look down here on earth, he pulls the strings and guarantees that everything will end well. You know this, I find it ethically repulsive, this metaphor for God, which was usually evoked by old theologists, which is that we ordinary mortals are like one who imagine a big classical beautiful painting. We with our limited view, we look too close at it, and you know, like if you look at Mona Lisa from 1 inch, you see just a stain. But if you step back and see all of it, you see how what you misperceived as a stain contributes to harmony of it all. This God dies there. And I think that the ethical reasons are clear, like, let's say somebody complains about Holocaust or Gulag or other things. Are you really really ready to say to this guy, listen, Holocaust may appear to you as something horrible, but can't you see how it contributes to the harmony of it all, and so on and so on? The gesture of Christ is precisely a kind of a self-deposition of God. What happens of the cross is, I think, on the cross is God abdicates. God no longer believes even in himself. So what happens is Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit, which is just our freedom, the community of believers. This is, I think, again, what is the ultimate message of Christianity. It's not you are safe, because no matter how confused things are, God is up there taking care of it. No, it's God lost control. It's up to you. And even not only Chesterton, some very intelligent Catholic intellectuals saw this. For example, a conservative like Paul Claudel, whom I appreciate very much, he said that the ultimate message of Christianity is God is impotent without us. It's not we have to rely on God. It's that the message of the cross is God is just a witness who relies on us. And just now, a little bit of a conclusion. So, what kind of theology can we bring out of this if at the end we just get the suffering Christ? Pure, impassive compassion, and basically telling us no transcendental guarantee, no one is pulling the strings. I think that, incidentally, only with such a radical reading can you really give, I don't have time to go into this now, of course, a consistent interpretation of all those problematic passages in the Bible. You know, this is my long tradition. For example, in Vienna and Munich, I had a debate even with some bishops, and I asked them these totally simple questions. For example, when God says, if you don't hate your mother, your father, you are not my follower. What does this mean? It's incredible what answers I got. If we were to be in medieval times, I would have burned them all. One of them, a bishop, told me, God just meant, don't be excessive in your earthly loves, reserve the true love for me. I find this disgusting and horrible. As if God is some jealous master who say, okay, love that woman a little bit, just I want to be sure that you love me more. I think it's exactly the opposite. In Christianity, you don't have to love God. God is love. God is here when you passionately love someone, and so on and so on. If we are in this universe which is radically atheist, It's not only that you think there is no God. Also, you don't have this unconscious God as the appearance on which you rely. What remains of religion? Here, if you allow me just some good 5 minutes to conclude, I would like to quote a guy whom I'm honored to call my friend, the ex-Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who is not an idiot. It's not a total idiot. And I mean this sincerely. There are two types of people, total idiots and not total idiots. There is no third option. He, commenting on the work of 4 British Catholic novelists, O'Connor, Percy, Spark, and Ellis, Rowan Williams wrote, I quote, "All 4, these 4 writers, create a world in which the secular majority account of what is going on is severely relativized. But there is no simple alternative that anyone can step into by a single decision or even a series of decisions. The religious dimension of these fictions lies in the insistent sense of incongruity, unmistakable even if no one within the fiction can say what we should be congruent with." End of quote. So the term negative theology is here meant in a much more radical sense than usually, where the idea is simply God is so much beyond that all of our positive determinations fail. The idea is rather that we locate negativity into God itself, that it is as if God as a positive entity fills in a certain negative place which precedes divinity, which is precisely the place of this, what in my Hegelianism I would have called negativity, this basic feeling of being out of joint and so on, which I think precedes any positive transcendence. In this sense, I'm not playing cheap paradoxical game that I say that theology for me as an atheist can survive. Religion is no longer the opium of the people today because, if for no other reasons than, and I like this well-known saying, that today the opium of the people is more and more simply opium itself, drug and so on. But and here I also think we should do 2 things. First, I think that we should reject not only evolutionary materialists like Richard Dawkins and so on. I mean, now I will be paradoxical here. Maybe all that Dawkins is describing is at some stupid factual level true. But still, he totally doesn't get the point of religion. It's simply not, even if it's true. And this is my position of negativity here. Another thing, I think we should also reject, I don't have time to go into it now, but I think we should also reject all this, how should I call it, what is usually referred to today as a new materialism, this re-enchantment of reality as immanently spiritualized. What I ironically like to call the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings materialism. Because did you notice that in Lord of the Rings universe, there are no gods. All the magic is material magic. You have magical beings, this, that, but there is no other dimension. It's a fully self-enclosed, spiritualized universe. I think that we have to keep alive precisely this sense of radical out-of-jointness. To just now, the last 2-3 minutes, just to make this clear and in your spirit, I would like also, if you began with vertigo, I would like much more modestly to end with one of the most disturbing TV episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Present, the early ones, 25 minutes. They are now republishing them. It's the one called The Glass Eye, the opening episode of the third year, where Jessica Tandy, incidentally, this is, if you are like the two of us Hitchcockologists, she's a crucial actress. On the one hand, she is the mother in The Birds,
Oh, yeah.
but at the same time, you know, for what I perceive as maybe the greatest Beckett play, the not I, which is really a partial object talking, the mouth. She was there, she was the original. Okay, she plays a lone woman who falls in love with a handsome ventriloquist, Max Collodi, the obvious reference to Pinocchio. So, every evening he performs in a small cabaret. She's there in the first row observing him, how he manipulates, you know, ventriloquism. Then comes, I was even shocked, I didn't expect this. Then, the last evening, it's his last performance, she gathers the courage and approaches him while the people are leaving there on stage and touches him like, hi, look at me, no? And can you imagine what happens? She discovers the big guy collapses as a doll. She discovers that the truly living being is the doll, the small one, that there is a midget in there, and that the truly manipulated one was the big one, you know. And then out of that costume steps out a dwarf, totally desperate, and starts to cry and runs away, and so on and so on. So what I'm saying is that, again, the result is the ventriloquist was in fact the dummy, while the hideous dummy is the actual ventriloquist. And what I claim is that God is dead means something similar. That we have to abandon the common notion of Christ as God who is the Father's puppet. No, the Christian reversal is something like this. Forget about God the Father, he was just a big fat dead doll. All that is alive is Christ there, and love that, accept that. So again, my point is, I will develop this in my next book much more in detail, but my point is, and I hope we agree here, that I don't like to bluff here. I'm not playing those games that Jürgen Habermas is now playing. Oh, I'm an agnostic, maybe God exists, maybe not. No, I am an atheist. But I think that without this, that my paradox would be this one. Only by going through Christianity, you can be, in this sense, a radical atheist. Without this authentic theological experience of out of joint, of this world we are in is not it, you, even if you pretend to be a materialist, you end up as some kind of a cheap, perverted spiritualist. This is why it's easy to prove, for example, how Stalinism is immanently, but in a perverted way, theological. Because, you know, the whole position of a Stalinist communist is a position of an instrument of some big other, historical necessity and so on. Like, I am not myself, I am an instrument of, and so on and so on. This is why I claim here, as a Hegelian, that in what sense does God give us freedom? Let's say you find yourself, okay, I'll put it like this, just to conclude. Let's say you find yourself in a position where you experience yourself as abandoned by God. Oh, God is out there, I'm alone, and so on. All other religions offer you the path of reconciliation. Weep yourself a little bit more good deeds, suffer, and maybe you will be able to rejoin God. The answer of Christianity is a totally different one. It is precisely when you feel totally abandoned by God, you are in the position of Christ. This is say, who on the cross is, you know, Father, why have you abandoned me, and so on. So in other words, the very gap that separates you from God is an inner self-separation of God himself. Your distance from God is part of divinity, which is why I think that's the good news of New Testament. The good news are not, oh, Godfather is there. No, the good news are, in a Hegelian way, if I put it, exactly the same as the bad news. The bad news is we are alone, no God will take care of us. And the good news is wonderful, so we are free. This loneliness is which succeeds self-erasure is precisely freedom. And that's the fundamental insight of Christianity, which is, I wonder if you will agree here, which is extremely important even politically today. Which is why, against political correctness, I am totally opposed to this idea that global capitalism, secular, and then we can resuscitate some stupid local traditions, you know, like Brazilian friends try to convince me that there are some tribes in lower Amazon which has some primordial wisdom, whatever, how you are, we don't just, but my point is this one. I'm here on the side of Malcolm X. You know what, I disagree with many things that he wrote. But one thing was a stroke of a genius. X. This is not a simple complaint, oh, bad white people deprived us blacks of our authentic roots. No, what Malcolm X saw is that this X, which means we have no hierarchic roots in tradition, we cannot trace our roots, that this horror that white people did to us is at the same time a unique chance of freedom to be more universalist than white people together. He saw this, and this is so important today, I think. We cannot fight, I think global imperialism, whatever we call it, is inherently multicultural. You don't fight it by sticking to your law. This is typical global capitalist subject. It's not the one who eats hamburgers, but it's the one who works for a big company, and then if you're a Buddhist, you do your meditation. If you're a Hindu, you do your sacrifices, whatever. All this fits perfectly global capitalism. The problem is to beat it with even stronger globalism. I'm very sorry if I use too much time, but that's it. Thanks very much. Now, do you want to open, or because I have not a lot, I have just some 20 questions, but do you want to?
But what is the rule of the game? He's going to tell us, Michael.
No, we should.
What?
You want to have endogenous fixed points.
Exactly,
no,
exactly.
You don't
Yes,
want
yes.
us to. Now I got it. You know?
Well,
You're welcome to speak with each other if you have any questions to address.
I certainly do have.
but it's going to be important also to get questions from
Yeah.
the audience, no?
No, I have just a couple of
But
very
how long
short
do we
points.
have? No, but question is, we have.
We have half an hour.
Half an hour?
No,
What?
no,
Yeah.
no, but it's not us. It's the
No,
Okay,
wait
there
a-
is no rule.
I'm
Okay,
I'm
okay.
a Stalinist here.
Okay.
Listen,
I will-
why give the word to them when we already know better than people what they really want? No, you don't buy this. You don't buy this. No, seriously, can I begin openly by
Okay,
asking
please,
you
please,
two, three
please,
questions?
please.
First, I love immensely that the way you structure that paradox of the gift, the 12th camel, and so on, because, you know, immediately I had two lines of associations. One is that, especially if you connect it with gift and so on, often in my books I described a phenomenon which I love. And I think in the same sense that you describe self-transcendence. It is an excess, but it's not just a rhetorical excess. It's necessary for the very exchange that what I call in my work offers meant to be refused. You know, this classic, let's say we go to dinner.
Yeah.
You are rich, I am poor, let's say.
Yeah.
We all know you will pay. But isn't it, at least in my part of the world, and I think also some, isn't it standard procedure that nonetheless I am expected to offer to pay, a little bit to insist.
Yeah.
And then I withdraw, but even if I know that it will be rejected, I have to make that offer.
Yeah.
This is what always fascinated me, how every community needs this type of element, or even at the level of rules and laws, how you do not simply get to become part of a certain community. It's not enough just to know what you are allowed to do and what you are not allowed to do. It's for structural reasons, which I would have linked with your self-transcendence, is also a necessary inconsistency here. Every system regulated by rules, human community, has to have first some rules which are meant to be transcendent. Like, you know, I tell you don't do this, but you are an idiot if you don't do this. You just have to do it discreetly. Or, even more interesting, a system allows you to do something and you are given the choice to do it on condition that you don't take the choice. But, and here I come to your self-transcendence, on condition that this redoubled prohibition must not be announced publicly. What do I mean by this? Just a brief, if we are on a stage here, imagine, this is a true dream, that it's a different stage. We are in 1936 in Moscow, I am Stalin, you are Central Committee. I give a speech, it's the applause, no. Then debate. One of you stands up and attacks me. Now, this would be pretty stupid, no? Like, next day everyone would be asking the question, who saw that guy alive the last? But let's say that another one of you would have stood up and started to shout at the first guy, are you crazy? Don't you know that here in Soviet Union we are not allowed to criticize Stalin? My theory is that this second guy would disappear even faster.
Yeah.
But as Derrida put it nicely apropos of Kafka, prohibition itself is prohibited. Something is prohibited, but it shouldn't be allowed as such. That's my first point. My second point, I love this mathematics, you know, of 1/2, 1/4, 1. Your solution was the +1, to add 1,
exactly.
which is purely, but there is another solution in the similar structure of jokes that I like, is that the subject throws itself into it to stop the subdivision. I quote in one of my books in the 90s in Croatia. They have that leader, Tudjman, who was a kind of a nationalist right-winger, and there was a wonderful joke about him. Of course, this is a joke which was already circulating before in other countries. It would just apply to him. It was that Tudjman is with his family on a plane above Croatia, and he says, what can I do for Croat people? Open that window a little bit, why don't I throw out a check for $1 million and I will make one Croat happy. Then his wife tells him, but listen, Franjo, his name, why don't you throw out 2 checks for $500,000 and make 2 Croats happy? And so on, and so on. And then his grandson, the voice of reason, you can imagine what he tells. But grandpa, why don't you throw yourself out and make all Croats happy, you know? And there are so many jokes which have this, but like there is a wonderful Stalinist joke which functions in the same way. 3 people meet in Lubyanka, KGB headquarters in mid-30s, and you know, immediately you talk about why are you here. The first one says, I am here, I got 5 years for criticizing Popov, a top functionary. The second one says, I got 10 years for supporting Popov, because later, no? You know, you can imagine what the third one says. I'm here for life, and I am Popov. You know this, okay, let me go on, very briefly. What you said about this endogenous fixed point, I like, he's an intelligent biologist, the one who unfortunately was deceased, Stephen Jay Gould. I think he has a perfect example of some fixed point which, although it's a pure fiction, it cannot be actualized, but it's absolutely necessary for the, you know, he takes the example of Hershey chocolate bars. You know, how, first you get a certain amount of chocolate for a certain price. Then the price was kept the same, but you get a little bit less chocolate. At a certain point, the price went up, the quantity also, but it was nonetheless a little bit lower than the first one. And Stephen Gould says, if you just bring this logic to the end, you can not only precisely construct the point at which you will get zero chocolate, but you can also say exactly how much this zero will cost. You know, it's a wonderful example. Okay, now really to finish with what I liked about futurists, you see, you again and again convinced me this is why I am for Hegel against Marx. Marx still believed, like that minister of yours, in this positive bootstrapping future. Hegel knew it no way. Hegel precisely was much more contingent, open than Marx. He prohibited any plans about this position, which is Marx's position, that you can be a historical agent who, as it were, have a privileged insight into historical necessity and in this way legitimize your own acts. This is totally prohibited for Hegel, which is why I think Hegel is much more, and just, I will not talk endlessly, then the word, you know, the last one, that Argentinian video, Shall I Cross? Not, you know. I noticed nonetheless some magical thinking there, which is nonetheless basically, or didn't I see it correctly, they survive.
Well, yes.
What I, in my evil mind, imagined is that one of them is hit and then blames the other, and then two blind people start to beat each other. That would be my much more pessimist version. I'm sorry for asking so much. No?
But are you asking anything? So I'm going to...
Now, this is a really evil question. I plead guilty.
No, I'm not making fun. It's...
no, but what I really wanted to ask you, serious question, is, where do you stand politically?
Oh.
Yes.
It's
a very... No, not do I believe. It's even more obscene question. Where do you... Your vision of how we should do what we should do with capitalism and so on, it's a vulgar question, but it intrigues me. How would you translate it into, or can you translate it into any of existing political orientations or not, or what?
In my country, because I mean, you act
generally.
No. You act in a given country, if not in a given nation state. The question doesn't.
Okay, but you are divided between the United States and France, no?
Yeah, and Brazil,
Okay, yeah.
And Brazil. There is no, but you know that as well as I do, no political offer that can satisfy any one of us. So, and when you are a citizen, well, you're asked to vote. That's all you are asked to. And so I don't even vote in my country.
I tend to agree with you. You know why? Because, my God, you know what is the problem today? We have freedom, certain freedom, which is the freedom of choice at this individual level. But isn't that the more we have this freedom, and this is what I find so horrible about all these secret agreements, TISA and so on. These are incredibly important agreements which will fix the economic coordinates of our lives for decades. They are done in secret. Like how, you know, the more we are interpellated, in Althusserian sense, as free subjects of free choice, the more totally transparent the social network is for us. We never decide or are even asked to decide about the global framework within which we can make our free choices. So unfortunately, I tend to agree with you.
I have a question to you too.
Aren't we now out of time? No.
No. Yeah.
Sorry.
But first I have a confession to make. The whole story I told is a hoax.
About the camels.
Exactly.
I suspected this because I know Lacan pretty well, but I didn't remember it.
Bravo.
But I
thought that I wanted to test you. But it's a hoax that I made in 1970, long time ago. I what I did was to take the mathematical problem, which is not
Uh-huh.
extraordinary difficult, but which is not trivial either. And it seems obvious to me to ascribe it to take it as an illustration of Lacan's notion of the symbolic.
But what about those hundreds of examples if you put it on Google in German? Was this also a lie?
No, but that means why hoax worked. Okay, let me explain to you.
Yeah.
So I said to myself, this is a beautiful illustration of Lacan's the symbolic.
Yeah.
So I wrote a paper, not only to say this is an illustration of Lacan's symbolic, but ascribing it to Lacan himself. And it worked. It worked. And in particular, it worked with Niklas Luhmann, whom I knew at the time.
Yeah.
German sociology is a great enemy
Yeah.
of Habermas. And Luhmann, in a very German, I hope I'm not going to, there are Germans in a very German philosophical way, wrote a 200 and almost 300 page book called Das wollte Kamel, about the
Attributing it to Lacan.
attributing to Lacan, and just mentioning in a footnote that he knew that through me. But I mean, that was a very true. And now, I mean, that was in the early 80s. And again, do the test. Google search das wollte Kamel. You'll see hundreds of sites describing it to Lacan through Luhmann. Yeah, okay. But
you know where is the real symbolic power?
That
Because
doesn't mean,
it doesn't matter if you say this.
Yeah.
It will still function as Lacan's.
But exactly.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of hoax which works, but I'm not making fun of anyone here.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that it worked. Huh? You see? Okay. Now, you see, we were given these masks here,
Yeah.
representing ourselves.
Yeah.
Huh? So this is a typically Žižekian topic, no? Feigning to be oneself.
Yeah.
Feigning to be oneself. And that made me think of many, many things. For instance, Molière's Don Juan. At the end of the play, he pretends to be a hypocrite in order to better demystify the hypocrites. But a hypocrite is someone, literally, who wears a mask. Hypocrite, that's what it means in Greek. So, Don Juan pretends to be someone who wears a mask, the mask of hypocrisy, in order to better demystify hypocrisy. So, I mean, so this is the kind of game you love. Another illustration of that is fake money. What is the difference between fake money and money that is legal tender? In a sense, there is a big one, and at the same time, there is none. Because a fake money that works, that rests on the gullibility of those who exchange that is exactly like real money. Huh?
Yeah, but here I deeply, sorry to interrupt you, but now I want
No,
to make
please.
Here you know why you were, and I mean it, I'm not making fun now, in a very sincere way, why you're a discovery for me. Because before reading you, I had some vague idea of a point, but only to read it, I made it clearly that we should ultimately reject this Marxist and phenomenological and so on idea of self-transcendence as bad, alienation and so on, you know. No, self-transcendence is it shouldn't be just dismissed as a bad, you know, like all this bullshit that we get how in an authentic society we just interact. Then in an alienated society it appears as if there is an external transcendent entity. But no, this is an absolutely structural necessity in this. We should totally reject this idea of an immediate self-transparent society. And the same goes for masks. Do you know, I mention it sometime, and I always think about that one. A beautiful film about the power of an authentic mask. For me, the most beautiful Rossellini film, a relatively late one, General della Rovere. Isn't it beautiful? You know, very briefly, he is a cheap swindler in 43-44 Nazi-occupied Italy. Vittorio De Sica plays a guy who, quite by chance, resembles a big resistance leader. That leader is in reality dead, but resistance doesn't know it. So Germans make an offer to this poor Italian. We let you leave, we bribe you, if you we will arrest you, and there, in front of other resistance that we have arrested, you pretend to be General della Rovere, and of course, they will confide you, tell you some. And okay, you can imagine what happens. The guy rediscovers his pride and takes his role so seriously that at the end he is shot as General della Rovere, and so on and so on. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. Did you see a movie which is vulgar, but I kind of liked it, with Jim Carrey, The Mask?
Of course I did.
I like this idea how, the Freudian drive it. It's not what is deep in you. I always like this metaphor of a mask which is stronger than you. And kind of you are caught into a mask. So I always hate this idea of taking off the mask, and like, I don't want to see your real face, or even less mine. Probably we are some filthy egotist. I don't know what shit you discover if you look too deep. I want nice, polite masks.
There is a beautiful article by Paul Ricoeur, the French philosopher, on the unfortunate translation in English, in French and English, but Spanish, Portuguese, whatever, of the two different German words, and we translated both of them as alienation. But one has a positive meaning, and Äußerung, meaning self-exteriorization. That's what I'm sensitive to, and I want to say. And Entfremdung, which means how could I put it in English? Estrangement. Yes, that's a negative sense of.
Yeah, but you know that there is the third one, which is sometimes also, no, but I think you translate it differently, the Brechtian one, which is not Entfremdung, which is, the German one is Verfremdung.
Verfremdung.
Verfremdung is the Brechtian extra. Sometimes, how do they, because that one is meant directly in a positive way.
So I don't know how to translate.
No, but, and I think that, again, this is what I find in your work. We all know that the big left, here I agree with my friend Alain Badiou, at least here, when he says the 20th century is over. It means all the 20th century left projects, from, of course, Stalinist communism, which is not simply over, but the irony is that Stalinist communists, where they are still in power, they are now the most efficient managers of capitalism, like in China. Social democratic welfare state. But there is another leftist myth that I'm deeply skeptical about. This myth of local communitarian, pre-representative, directly engaged, without, communities in a transparent way, we are all engaged, no alienation, representation. I'm totally opposed to this. First, for the simple elementary reason, can you imagine living in this type of society where you would have to be engaged all the time with some stupid problems? How do we get food? No, I want a good alienated system which functions invisible, and then we can watch Hitchcock and write our books and so on. So what I learned for you is this, let's call it absolutely positive, constitutive aspect of alienation. Even at the most elementary level in language. I like language because from the, for example, let's say we meet on a street. Not you, I would really like to meet you, but another one. And then, of course, we met and I say the usual bullshit. No, how are you? Nice to meet you. Okay, we all know that. My first thought was, my God, why didn't I notice him 5 seconds earlier so that I would be able to cross? But you know what's the miracle of politeness? Even if we all know this, nonetheless, it's wrong to say that we are hypocritical. It's a kind of a sincere lie. And I claim it's wrong in a phenomenological way to claim that this is just a formalization, a fixation of some primordial authentic moment when people really meant it, glad to see you. No, I claim the gap is here from the very beginning. This is why my salute goes to the great old Hollywood producer, Sam Goldwyn. You know, his wonderful Goldwynism. When some newspapers attacked his films as containing too many old cliches. You know what memo he wrote to his scenario department? We urgently need some new original cliches. And he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
Cliché is the self-transcendence of language
yes.
in this sense.
Yes.
Can I interrupt for a second really quickly? We'll finish your point, but I wanted to see if we wanted to have one or two questions from the
Oh,
audience
sure.
before the
Yeah, but
next-
should he reply me? Just take my word from me. Don't you deserve nonetheless to?
No, but I mean, I think it's important
Because
to
I
have the
feel bad,
feedback
yeah.
from the people present.
Please continue.
At the same time, superposition of questions.
Are you bourgeois Democrat, or did you distribute the questions so that, in a Stalinist way so that?
I have a question for both of you. I'm curious how you would relate the program turtles that are programmed to do nothing other than mimic one another's movement, or the absent-minded professors, the two blind men crossing the road, each of which is operating with a complete absence of any kind of plan, assuming that the other one has that.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the comparison with that, with the example you gave of Life is Beautiful. If both the father and the son know what's going on in the camp, but each pretends that the other one doesn't know in order to keep the game going, that would seem in some way to amount to the same thing, but one comes from an excess of knowledge, whereas the other comes from a lack of knowledge. I'm curious how those two moments relate to one another.
It's yours.
So, okay, thank you. It's not really a lack of knowledge in my case. Actually, behind this, it's a chapter of John Maynard Keynes, the general theory of money, employment, and the other way around. Okay, it's a general precept of rationality. If I don't know, for instance, on the market where there is a lot of uncertainties, if I don't know how things work and how they are going to work, it is rational to imitate the others because there is a chance that they do know. If they do not know, I will lose nothing in a sense, but if they know, I will profit from their knowledge by imitating them. And there is no way for me to know whether they know or whether they do not know. So the rational, on a market like a financial market, the rational behavior is to imitate the others. But so everyone imitates everyone else. And that can produce a catastrophe, or if a few members of the crowd know the truth being the real value of this asset, for instance, of this action or bond, the whole crowd will benefit from the knowledge of some. But there is no guarantee that all of us, we won't go into the big hole. Yeah. So there is it's more complex than the absence of knowledge. It's if there is uncertainty, and for sure there is indeterminacy about the future, then imitating the others may be the rational thing to do. But in that case, of course, in the case of the two blind men, it didn't work. Although, as Slavoj said, they survived in this particular ad. But it's an ad for a business magazine, so it would be, if they didn't survive, it would be a problem.
Can I just ask you, and you go on?
No, I'm finished.
Didn't the philosopher, not the old German idealist Schelling, but this,
Schelling.
but the other Schelling,
yes, Schelling, Thomas
didn't
Schelling.
he develop something similar?
Focal points.
Yeah,
Absolutely
focal,
so.
yeah.
Exactly.
So you also implicitly refer to
Oh,
Schelling.
yes,
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
so. Yes, but we had 40 minutes, so we couldn't.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. No, but absolutely so. Thomas Schelling, yes. What was the title? The Strategy of Conflict, 1960. His book about that.
The idea is
Focal
that
points,
it's even
etc., etc.
crucial that it even
Absolutely
played
so.
some real
Yes.
role in preventing Cold War turning hot and so on,
exactly,
catastrophe, no?
exactly. Yeah, but the question was for you too, no?
No, the only thing I can say is that for me the big enigma is the status of knowledge, who knows what, and so on and so on, and because a situation similar with that of Benigni, you know. Here, the chicken is the big other, the public space. Look, this is for me the paradox of Stalinism. Usually people said that Western democracies are, that Stalinism relies on brutal force, while in the West you are manipulated. It's not as simple as that. Stalinism was, of course, an extremely brutal regime, killing millions without problem. But at the same time, that's the enigma of Stalinism, it was a regime which was incredibly depending on appearances being kept.
Yeah.
Like, something that can happen now. Now we have different types of leaders. Even in United States, starting with Reagan, or in Argentina, Menem was maybe the first. He made openly fun of himself and so on. You know, this structure of power which makes fun of itself, don't take itself seriously, but nonetheless it functions and so on. While the Stalinist regime, it behaved as if something which everyone knew it's true, but it shouldn't be said publicly. As if the whole system would collapse if anyone were to say this publicly. And this, here you have, you know, we all know the chicken shouldn't know it.
Yeah.
It's a very, here you have the mystery, here you have, for example, I'll give you another example. You know Khrushchev's speech, 20th Congress, when he blah, blah. Yeah. You know that the situation was so tense that it would be nice for us to have such an effect that, you know that 4 or 5 people, while Khrushchev was delivering his big speech denouncing Stalinist crimes, there were ambulance units with stretchers waiting there. 5 people died during the speech of heart attack. But wait a minute, they didn't learn anything new. My God, everyone knew about Stalinist gulags and so on. It's just that the big other learned, the appearance was broken, you know. So as I think, was it Doctor or which American contemporary writer who said something like, the appearances are all we have, so let's treat them gently, you know. This is why I was always, that's why I hate actor studio, incidentally. You know, this idea of be heroic, tear off the appearance, go deep into your, I'm not interested in anyone's true face.
That makes me think of, I have a chicken story that dovetails nicely with yours. It's a true story, actually. Reg, when he introduced me, mentioned the influence that a certain Heinz von Förster had on me. That's one of the founding fathers of cybernetics. Heinz von Förster was a Viennese Jew, but protected by his aristocratic name, von Förster. Yeah. So actually he spent the war in as an electrical engineering before coming to this country and founding cybernetics. Yeah. And he was working near Danzig. And
Danzig, you mean Danzig?
Danzig.
Danzig in Poland.
In Poland, yes,
okay,
Danzig. Every day he would ride his bike to go from his home to his work, and he noticed that, it was easy to notice, that when he was riding his bike and crossing a farm, for instance, the chickens that were there would end up under his wheels. And every other day he would kill a chicken, had to pay for it, and he was fed up with eating chickens and paying for them, so he decided to study the mathematics of this. And he understood the following thing. A chicken is not a stupid animal, and he's afraid. It's not stupid. It is not stupid, and it feels fear. And for the chicken, it's fundamental to see the danger, to keep the danger in his visual field. And it turns out that the chickens see sideways like this.
Mhm.
So it's a very beautiful mathematical problem. Imagine the trajectory of the chicken such that at a given speed, such that constantly the chicken sees sideways the wheel of the bicycle. And that it's a very complicated curve, but for a given ratio of the two speeds, the speed of the chicken and speed of the bicycle, ends up with the chicken below the wheel. And there is something counterproductive here. It's what Heinz did was to slow down. And when he knew all these things, he understood that it was exactly the opposite. He had to accelerate and save the lives of the chicken. So the chicken was very smart. The chicken just wanted to see the danger coming to him. You see? Okay, that's a chicken story.
One more question over here.
Hi. I actually have a question for each of you, if that's okay, or I can just ask one question. Mr. Dupuy, I was noticing in the fork you talk about probable futures. That diagram is suggestive of discrete vectors. And I was wondering if that presents a problem because you're trying to describe any possible future, but you're already showing it as discrete. And for Mr. Zizek, I was wondering if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell when you're talking about atheism and this idea of atheists creating the big other, and in that way they create a bigger sense of God than traditional religious people. And what if you know about that, when you think about it.
But I'm not sure. Sorry. You want to answer the question that was put to you?
No, you.
No, but the problem is that I'm not sure I got your point. Probable futures, you said, no?
So you have a diagram where
Yes.
the future has all these different paths.
With the loop. The loop, huh?
Not the loop, the forks.
The forks.
The forks, yeah.
Oh, the future as a garden of forking paths.
Right.
Yes, okay.
Forks.
Possible futures.
Right, but that describes discrete vectors or discrete paths instead of something that wouldn't be discrete.
Oh, not necessarily so, because you can have bifurcations almost everywhere. At every point in time in which a decision has to be made, or a chance event occurs, you have a bifurcation. So you can have bifurcations almost everywhere along the path. So the image of a garden of forking paths it's a bit misleading, because you must imagine, again, I repeat, bifurcations almost everywhere. But it's still an infinite tree, let's put it this way, as opposed to the loop of the what I call projected time. Huh? Two different metaphysics, completely different. But this conception of the future gave rise to a discipline called, you don't have the word in English, I don't know why, by the way, because in French it's prospective, it should exist in English, prospective, which was founded by two French philosophers, Bertrand de Jouvenel and Gaston Berger. And it gave rise to the method called the scenarios method. Huh? Scenarios method. Huh? It's okay.
Again, I will try to be very short because you talk about Joseph Campbell, who is influential, was influential. My problem is, so I'd rather not go into it, my problem is that he was a Jungian, and I do have a problem with Jung. For me, Jung is precisely what I'm in this big conflict, Jung versus Freud. I'm totally Freudian, because I think that Jung precisely reinscribes psychoanalysis in some kind of mythic pre-modern universe and so on and so on. So it's, although there are some minor texts by Jung that I do appreciate. For example, he did a pretty nice text on the book of Job, I think. So I'm not totally blinded for Jung, but as a general orientation, what he stands for. Also, I'm totally opposed to this, that Jung has, to this, how should I call it, balanced way of thinking, you know, like we in the West too much reason, in the East too much, you know, this type of, I am also like you, I am an extremist, you know. I never think that the truth is in the middle. I think the truth is always in the extreme. And I even like to use this brutal example. Let me say, you are a Jew, I am a Nazi, we debate things in 37. If you take it simply at the factual level, then the result, you claim, of course, we Jews are innocent, I claim Jews are guilty. But if you approach it as a rational debate, peaceful, the result would be morally disgusting. It would have been, the truth is somewhere in between. Like, okay, we the Nazis exaggerate, but, for example, Jews exploit Germans. Well, some of the Jews were rich, and in this formal sense, they exploited Germans. Or, what was the other Nazi claim? Jews are seducing German girls. Well, fuck it, I hope they did, and I hope that, you know what? So, you know what I mean? The big, here Lacan has a wonderful insight. I quote it all there. When he says, okay, it's a little bit male chauvinist, we should change the example, but it's beautiful. Who says, let's take a jealous, pathologically jealous husband who thinks his wife is sleeping all the time around with other men. And Lacan says, even if all his suspicions are justified, the wife really is doing this, his jealousy is still pathological. Because what makes it pathological is not the factual truth or not, but how he needs that fixation of jealousy to maintain his psychic identity, blah, blah. And I think it's the same with anti-Semitism. The way to find anti-Semitism is not, oh, but Jews are not like that. It doesn't matter. The point is not that. The question is, why did Hitler, Nazi, why did they need a figure like a Jew to maintain, to sustain their politics, and so on and so on? You know, so just referring to these forks and so on, you know which joke I think should be also somehow connected with what you were saying? You know Ninochka, of course.
Yeah.
You know that mega joke that all we Lacanians are now exploiting, that just before he falls down and Greta Garbo laughs, he tells her, basically it's a joke that a guy comes to a cafeteria and said, coffee without cream, please. And the waiter says, sorry, we ran out of cream, we only have milk. So since we don't have cream, I cannot give you coffee without cream. And I remember from my youth, we had this joke, like somebody enters the store and says, do you have toilet paper? And the guy says, no, we are the store which doesn't have toilet paper, it's across the street. We are the store which doesn't have oil, you know. And I think that this will be something with your, how, when you get coffee, as a Hegelian, I claim, it's very important if it's coffee without milk or if it's coffee without milk or coffee without cream, even if it's materially the same coffee. Along the same lines, my favorite erotic line in movie is, there was brushed off English working class half comedy, where there is such a beautiful erotic scene, nothing dirty, it's just this. Ewan McGregor, when he still played a working class hero before he became a Jedi and so on, he plays a miner on strike and flirts with a girl, okay. He accompanies her home after dinner, obviously something will happen, but then there is just a short dialogue when in front of the house, she tells him, would you like to come up for a coffee? He says, I would love to, but I don't drink coffee. She answers, no problem, I don't have any. Nothing happens, just a nonsensical denial, but I cannot imagine a more erotic situation. You know what I mean? No.
On that note, let's thank
can I say something else? In places like here, Portland, things really happen. I am running around a lot, and I can tell you, all these big places like Harvard, New York, they tend to be, isn't this a right-wing expression with you for intellectuals, but here it's justified? They tend to be too bright for their own good. They think they are in, but they are not, they don't have the true spirit and so on.
Thank you.
And here you find more spirit, so I'm glad to be here.
In case anybody's interested, we have some of the texts available for sale at the door, and Van will help you with that. And I just want to thank both of our speakers again. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. What a way to spend Halloween.